In this series of short videos, we're going to explore how to use the Photoshop Frame Animator to take your static web banner to animated web banner. And here's how we're going to do it. Let's begin by creating a new Photoshop document. I'm going to work with art and illustration. The size of our web banner is 1080 by 384, which will give us a landscape layout. Now, while I'm working, I want the resolution to be 300. This way the raster effects on the graphics will look better. The resolution doesn't matter for the final output. It's the aspect ratio that matters for a web application. But while we're developing, we want that extra resolution so our image looks better. All right, so we will be in RGB color mode, 8 bits. White background's fine, or you could set to a transparent. Either will be okay. We're going to work with our sRGB color profile, and our pixels will be square for this screen application. Then we should be able to create. And I'm just going to point out, I already have the animator open here, but you would go up to the window menu and we would find timeline. And we can toggle the timeline on and off. So let's go back up to window. We'll go back down to timeline. And you have the choice of either creating a video timeline or a frame timeline. This animation will use a sequential frame animation approach. So we will select Create Frame Animation and then click on the type. And we now have our frame animator. I'm just going to double check on this, see if I can make the frames larger. So we'll go into our properties. And unfortunately, this is all the way down at the bottom, but there is a panels option at the bottom. And yes, I already have this set to the larger icon size, but you can change the thumbnail size of the icon for your frame animator. So let's go ahead and click OK. And we are ready to begin. Let's go ahead and save our document. I'm going to save this into a folder I have labeled Frame Animation, and you'll notice there's a folder inside for artwork. And it's a good idea to have all of your content within a root folder. That way everything for the project is organized, and if you move the folder around, all of the pieces and parts will go with it. So let's give this a name. I'll call this banner frame, and then short for animation, we'll just say Annie.psd. You'll see I already have a couple of other banners in here. Just a quick look, Photoshop file, we want layers, we're embedding our sRGB color profile, so we will click Save. And again, I'm just going to point out we have our root folder, frame animation. I have a folder labeled art. This is where I will keep the various assets for the project. You'll notice each of the elements has their own folder. I also have credits of where I have found the different assets I'm going to use in this project. And I'll just point out that the artwork has come from freepik.com. To get started, I have selected this orange hue, and I'll use the rectangle tool, and I'll try to start in that upper corner, but if not, we can fix this. So just to be absolutely accurate, I'm going to go over to my properties and I'll type in 1080, and I do have the height right, 384, so we can just press enter or return. And then the X and the Y, I want to make sure that I am in fact starting at 0, 0 on the X and the Y, and everything looks correct. So I want to add a lighting effect. What I'm going to do next is right-click on my layer for the rectangle and rasterize the layer. So now we're just dealing with raster art. And I'm going to change this from rectangle 1 to background, because it's a good idea to make sure that you name all of your layers. You want to be as organized as possible. This orange background is okay, but it's not overly interesting. So let's explore using a lighting effect to add a little more character to the background. I'm going to first zoom out, and I'm going to purposely make the rectangle very small because the lighting effect filter is going to take up a lot of room with how I'm going to use it. So let's go to filter, and I had used lighting effects before, but basically we'll go down to render and lighting effects. And you'll see that basically you can move the effect, you can rotate and scale the effect. What I want to do is have this light source, and you can go over in the properties and you can explore different light sources, and you can work with colors and explore all day long. I'm just going to make a basic lighting effect, and the idea here is I want one side being the right side, to be bright and the left side to be more dark. So there's sort of a gradation that goes across here, and you can see you can make adjustments for how this light hits the surface. So I'm just going to position my light like so. And when you're happy with the result, click OK, and you will now see the result of that lighting effect. This just adds a bit more character to our background. The first part of our animation, and the most difficult, will be the gear. And I want this gear to rotate clockwise 360 degrees. So let's go ahead and get our gear, and I should mention in my folder, I have a folder specifically for the gears, and then I'm using this graphic here. I already have it open, but I'm just letting you know, in this case, I'm using a JPEG file because I'm just going to do a quick selection of the gear, and the gear is going to be rotating. So the quality doesn't have to be, like perfect. It needs to be good, it needs to be decent. But the gear is going to be moving, and the mind's eye is going to fill in a lot of the gaps. So we can have a little less visual quality. So I'm just going to use the magic wand. Tolerance will be 32, anti-alias, that's all good. So I'm just going to make this quick selection, and we're going to copy. So let's edit and copy. Let's go back to our banner, and we will paste. Now this gear is really large, so let's get our move tool, and we will just scale our gear down. And I'm going to try to get it close to the size I have it in this example here, which appears to be pretty close. Oh, I guess I didn't commit to the change, so when I left the page it went back. So we'll just scale it down again real quick, like so, a little bit smaller. There we go. So we'll commit to this. I'm going to zoom in, and we're going to see a slight anti-alias. So when I did the selection and we copied, we are against a white background, so we see the white halo going around the outside. So we're going to, and that just happens in the anti-aliasing. Otherwise, the movement from the foreground to the background, and we're capturing some of the background just to help things blend in. But we're on an orange background now, so we get that kind of funky halo. So first thing, I'm going to rename my layer Gear 1, and I'll do a quick select. So I'll just hold, I'm using a Mac, so I'll use a Command key. You would use the Control key on a PC, but for the most part, I'm going to call out Mac OS commands. So let's hold the Command key, click on our icon, we get a quick selection, and I'm going to go ahead and go to select, and we'll go down to modify, and I'm going to contract by 1 pixel. So I'll change this contraction by 1 pixel, click OK. And now what I want to do is get rid of what's outside of the selection. So let's go up to select and inverse the selection. So now what is selected is actually inside the gear, the circle part, and outside. So I'm just going to delete. And it's really, really subtle, but when we deselect and we zoom in, that one selection was enough to get rid of that halo going around the outside. So now I want a white gear, not blue. I just want the gear to be white for this banner animation. So I'll go back and command click on the icon for gear 1 again to get this selection. We'll make a new layer. I'll drag this up and I'll hide what I called gear 1. Let's get our default colors, then we'll switch white to the fill, to the top color here, foreground color. Let's go up to edit, fill, and I'm going to fill with the foreground color. We'll click OK, Command D to deselect, and we now have our gear on our banner. Now, this gear, the one I initially called gear 1, I have this hidden for now. I probably won't need this. We could get rid of this layer later on. So I'm going to go ahead and call this new layer gear 1, and I'll rename what I called gear 1. We'll just call this one the original gear. I have decided to animate the gear first because the total amount of frames in the animation is going to be based on creating a visual clockwise loop of the gear rotating. All right, so I'm going to zoom in. We'll talk about this as we move through the process, but I'm going to move in so it's really easy to see the gear. I'll select the gear, and I notice that the width and the height are 246. I'm going to make the width and the height both 245 pixels in this example. I'm not really sure it matters how large or how small the gear is. Everything should calculate the same way. I'm just going to go with 45 instead of 46. Next, I need to get, with our gear selected, I'm going to get a guide and place the guide here in the center vertically. And I want to rotate the gear. And we'll talk about this as we go through, but I want to rotate the gear to where the left hand part of the top tooth and the right hand bottom of the part of the bottom tooth, I want to get those the best I can visually here. So I'm going to fuss with this for a moment. And we want to try to be as precise as possible. So I'm going to commit so we can see. And it's interesting what this does. I don't know why it does this, but I noticed that it did a transform. It changed the width to 247. So I'm going to put this back to 245. And I'm just going to go ahead and save before something happens here. Now we're going to get a guide from the top ruler well, and I'm going to drag this. This should be our center. So we're now on the top part of the tooth on the right hand side, and we're on the bottom part of the tooth on the left hand side. So this should be our center, but when it comes to getting a perfect circle, no doubt something's going to happen, and we'll probably have to troubleshoot as we go. We are setting up our baseline. What we're trying to do is get the most bang for our buck, if you will. So we want the gear to rotate 1 revolution clockwise. But what we're going to do is create an illusion. So we're going to, I'll just do this real quickly here. We're going to basically rotate what is 30 degrees. So 1 tooth movement, 5 or 6, probably 6 frame loop over and over from here to here, we'll get what looks like this, okay? So let's find out. Let's put this back where we had it. Matter of fact, it might be best just to do a quick Command Z. All right. And I'm just going to double check. Width, height, 245. My gear is called Gear 1, so we should be good. To get the animation started, in a frame animation, I can't actually do a rotation. Okay, I can't tween a rotation, so I have to have a separate layer for each gear, and each layer will have the gear moving 5 degrees. So let's take gear 1, and we will duplicate, and let's call this gear 2. And let's go ahead and set our name. On this field is where I can set the rotation. So we're going to rotate 5 degrees. And then we're going to take gear 2 and duplicate. And this will now be gear 3. And we will rotate this gear 5 degrees. Let's duplicate gear 3. This will be gear 4. And we will rotate 5 degrees again. Now we should have gear 5 coming up. Set the name, rotate 5 degrees. Now it looks like we have a perfect circle now, but let's go ahead and just do a real quick trick with our opacity. And in animation, if we change the opacity, let me just do this real quickly here. So I'll start with gear 2. I'll drop the opacity down some. We'll go to gear 3, drop the opacity 4, and now gear 5, which is covering everything, we'll drop the opacity. And we start to see these little subtle changes. So I'm going to go through each gear real quickly and change the opacity to a smaller number. And it's even better if you do something like 10%, 20%, 30%. It's a lot easier to see the changes. And this in animation is called onion skinning. And it's where we're able to see the transition from one frame to the next frame, or from one piece of art to the next piece of art over time, and we can see that transition. So I'm thinking everything looks really close, but you'll notice we have some larger spaces. So I believe we need one more frame because we have 5, 10, 15, 20. We need 30. Let's go ahead and take gear 5. We'll call this gear 6. Set the name, and we will go 5 more degrees. And I believe you notice this pattern that we see looks much more uniform as far as those triangles. So I now believe we have 30 degrees of rotation. So we have our 6 gears. We've moved them 5 degrees each, and we are on a single frame. So we need a frame for each of the gears. So I'm going to go ahead and duplicate selected frames. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So now we can click on these frames sequentially, 1 through 6, and everything looks the same. That is because all of these layers are behaving the same way on each frame. So let's go to frame 1. I'm going to go ahead and save, and I'm going to turn off the eyeballs for all but frame, or I should say gear 1. Now we'll go to 2, and we'll turn on gear 2. We'll turn off gear 1. Let's go to gear 3, and just to test real quick, there's frame 1. We see gear 1, and that's it. We go to frame 2, we should see gear 2, and that's it. Let's go to 3, and we will turn off 1, turn on gear 3, and I'm going to save. Let's go to frame 4, turn off gear 1, turn on gear 4, and I'm going to save. Now 5, frame 5, off with gear 1, on with gear 5. We have one more frame to go, frame number 6, and we will save. Now I'm going to point out that the interframe delay I want at no delay, which is 0 seconds, because I want each frame to play as quickly as it can. So if you were doing an animation where you wanted a pause or you wanted to slow things down, you could change how many milliseconds there are. So I'm going to go with no delay for all of my frames. I'm just going to double check. So I have frame 1, and I'm going to go through visually and just make sure that the appropriate gear is the only one that is visible. So there's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to press the play button, and we get our animation. Now we're getting this flashy thing because I don't have them all set at the same opacity. So I'm going to up each, and I'll have to actually switch the frames. So there's gear 2, frame 2. So there's 3. Let's get number 3 up to 100%. And I probably should save some time and pause the video and just jump ahead and say, hey, look, it's all done, but we're almost there, so I'll finish it up. Might be a good way to learn just through repetition. So now number 6. So let me test this again. So I'm just going to press start. And everything looks pretty good as far as we are getting the rotation. But let me deselect so we're not seeing that frame, and then we'll play again. Now there's a slight warble, I'll call it a warble, and that's like there's not a perfect circle, or we didn't get the selection right in the center perfectly with the original art. So we're going to explore how to fix this little warble next. Let's go ahead and fix the little warble we have in our gear. So I'm going to do this by using the Elliptical Marquee tool. And I'm hoping that this is the actual center of the gear. It's going to be close enough probably. So I'm going to start at the center of the gear and begin to draw a marquee. I'll hold the Option key to draw from the center, or make the selection from the center. Hold the Shift key to constrain. And as I drag this, you'll see with that selection that we're actually very close, but we're off ever so slightly. So I don't really know how much that change is from gear to gear. So I'm going to err to the safe side, something like so. When I say like so, meaning that the selection is going to go into the gear a little bit. I'm going to make sure I have gear 1 layer selected, and we're going to delete. We'll go to gear 2. It's probably be a good idea to go from frame to frame and layer to layer. So we'll go to our next frame, gear 2. We'll go to frame 3, gear 3, 4, 4, and again on each frame I'm selecting the corresponding layer and deleting. We'll go to our 6th frame, our 6th layer, and delete. Now let's go ahead and save. Just to be on the safe side, let's check. So I'm going to deselect the selection, and let's go to frame 1, and we will press play. And we're not getting that warble anymore. But let's just test something here. Let's start from our center again with an elliptical selection. Option Shift. This time I'm going to go all the way to the outside. And you'll see we're very close on the teeth. Very, very close. So what I'm going to do is just come in and just touch the top part ever so closely, like so. And now you'll see some of the teeth stick out a little, some are right on the selection. So what I am going to do next is inverse our selection. So we'll just go up to select and inverse, and we're going to go back to frame 1, and we're going to do the same process. frame 1, gear 1, and we are going to press delete. And we're just going to trim off just that little bit of the outside of the teeth. And we're going to, again, do this for each frame and each layer. Now, the animation looked pretty good, but we're going to try to make this the best we can. So now we're up to frame 5, gear layer 5, 6, gear layer 6. We'll go back to 1. We'll deselect. We will save. And let's test real quick. Let's see if that helped. So we no longer have that warbling on the inside of our gear, and the outside of the gear looks pretty good also. So we now have 6 frames. Let's stop our animation here. So we have 6 frames, each frame moving 30 degrees. And what happens is we don't have a 7th, okay? You'll notice we don't quite come all the way back, because if we had a 7th gear, if we move that last 5 degrees, then we would have frame 7 and frame 1 in the same spot. So what would happen is you would have what looked like a frozen moment. The gear would stop rotating. Now, what we're going to do is make our animation twice as long. So we were able to use 6 frames to accomplish a gear rotating 360 degrees. I moved the gear 5 degrees at a time because the velocity, that the amount of movement in that amount of time, gives us a rotation that looks decent. It's not too fast, it's not too slow. And visually it's actually kind of interesting because we start to see this blur, which almost makes the gear look like there's a shadow running across the face of the tooth on the inside. So that's actually sort of a little bonus benefit there optically. All right, so I'm going to stop, and I will select all 6 frames, and then we're going to go down and we're going to select the tween. So we're going to tween our animation frames. Whoops, I hit the wrong one, sorry, my bad. I meant to hit the plus sign. I didn't want to tween them, so I undid that. I hit the plus sign, so I now get 6 more frames. So I have a total of 12 frames. So let's make sure I didn't mess anything up here. So we'll go back to frame 1. We'll play our animation, and everything looks exactly the same. It's just now I have more frames to work with when I begin to add other animation to the banner. Now, what I would like to do is clean up my layers a little bit. So I'm going to select layers 1 through 6, and we're going to create a folder group. I'm going to call this Gear 1. We could call it Gear Group 1 since there's multiple layers in here. So we'll say Gear Group 1, like so. And we'll see all of our gears inside. Now I'm going to select all of the gears, right click, and I'm going to link the layers. Now it's just out of sight down here, but I'm going to link all of these layers together. So now let's just see how this works. I'm going to hide the guides. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, like so, and I'm going to select my group. Now I'm going to see if they're all linked together. There they are. Now if I move the group, I can always go back in history, but let's just see if I move, and let's go ahead and play. All right, so they're linked together. They're all inside of a folder. So now it's much easier to move them around and not break the animation. Now I want to change the scale of my gears, or I should say my gear group. So I'm going to select frame 1 and then shift click gear 1 through gear 6. I'm not going to select the folder because you'll likely get an unexpected result, and go ahead and try it if you like. So I'm just going to select the layers inside, and I'm going to scale my gear down to 200 by 200 pixels. And I could use the transform tool to do this, but I'm just going to watch on the screen. And there we go. And let's give a real quick test here after we commit the transformation. And there is our gear rotating. I'm going to select the folder and the gears and move this gear like so. Now I had frame 7 selected and it moved just frame 7 down here. So I'm going to undo, select frame 1. Let's move. And now let's test real quick. So our animation is correct, looks okay. Let's go ahead and stop. So I'm going to unlink these gears. And again, that part of the menu was just out of the screen there, but I'm selecting unlink the gears. And I'm going to take gear 1 and we're just going to make a copy. And then we'll move gear 1 up above our group, and then I'll remove copy. So this will be gear 1 again. It's going to be in a different group, so having the same name should not be a big deal. Now I want this gear to look different in 2 ways. It's going to be smaller and it's going to have a thicker center part. So let's go ahead and zoom in. I'm just going to guess on center here. So let's go and get the elliptical marquee tool because I've moved the guides around from a previous step. So let's just create a circle, and I need this to be large enough, pretty close. So I'm going to use the arrow keys. Let's go ahead and just use white. I'm going to make sure I have gear 1 layer selected. We'll get the paint bucket and we will pour white inside. I'll have to do this maybe 2 or 3 times to get rid of that little halo. And now what I've tried before, this is really weird what happens, and let's see if it does it again. So select, modify, and contract. And let's contract by 45 pixels. And you notice you actually get what looks kind of like a hexagon or octagon sort of shape. And this is not going to work at all. But it will help us find the center fairly easily. So let's go ahead and modify, contract. We'll contract by 20 pixels. That was too much, so Command Z. We'll do our modify, contract. I don't know, let's just try 5 pixels. Okay, so I'm going to use this sort of funky shape to bring my guides back. I'll get the move tool and I'll use that shape to hopefully find or pretty darn close to the center. And you can see where the lines are lining up on the teeth, top, bottom, left, right. We're probably pretty close. So let's go ahead and deselect. Actually, I don't want to delete that. I just want to deselect. And we'll get our selection tool. We'll start in the center, Option Shift, maybe that big of a hole in the center. So I'll make sure I have gear 1 layer selected. We'll press delete. We will deselect. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's our gear. Let's make our gear smaller, like so. Let's place our gear like so. We will commit to the change. I'll zoom in so it's a little easier to see. Here's gear 1. Let's duplicate gear 1. This will be gear 2. And we will rotate -5 degrees because we want to go anti-clockwise. And I'll go ahead and save. I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to complete the rest of the layers just to save us a little time. So I've gone through pretty much the same process, creating the layers, naming each layer, rotating each layer another -5 degrees, and then going through the process of hiding and showing the appropriate gear layer on each frame. So when we play, we have our gear, which is smaller and thicker and rotating in the opposite direction. I'm going to go ahead and group the smaller gear into its own folder, and we'll call this gear group 2, and we'll save. And just to be on the safe side, I will link all of these gears also. So let's link our layers. Again, sorry, that's off the screen. It's a little tough for you to see. So let's go ahead and move them. I'm going to leave the folder not selected this time. We'll go to frame 1. We'll get our move tool, and let's just see if things move correctly. I'm not going to get these, I don't need them really close because I don't want them to actually physically mesh together, but just to get the basic idea. Let's test, and that works well. So let's go ahead and take gear group 2 and duplicate. We'll call this gear group 3. We'll save. So let's go ahead and move these. And what's happened is all of the eyeballs turned on again. So I'm going to have to fix those eyeballs. So I'm going to pause and do that fix real quick. All right, I went ahead and just, while I was paused, moved the gear set over, so it was just a little easier for me to see instead of up in this corner. We have frame 1, and gear 1 is showing frame 2, gear 2. Now I went through each, and once I arrived at 7, I had to do the process again, okay? Meaning turning turning number 1 off and then turning the appropriate gear layer on. So now let's just go ahead and deselect. We'll play. So we have our animation running correctly. So I'm going to pause and again I'll select my folder and shift click and select all the way down to gear 1. I'm going to go to my frame and select frame 1 just to be on the safe side so I don't accidentally move something and not one of the other gears. So let's see if I place this over here like so. And let's just test it real quick. And it appeared to move correctly. So I'm going to try just using the arrow keys and nudge that gear over just a little bit more. Let's test it. And it might have messed things up because I might have had frame 12 selected. So let's see if I messed it up. And you see that jump? That's because I had frame 12 selected. So I'm going to use history. And let's go back. There's nudge. and then there's move. Let's test it again real quick here. All right, so I'm going to pause. This time I'll make sure frame 1 is selected, and instead of nudging, I'll move this more manually, like so. Let's test. I had frame 1 selected. And that looks about right. All right, so we now have 3 groups of gears, 2 of them rotating anti-clockwise, 1 of the gear sets moving clockwise with somewhat of an appearance like they're visually meshing together. Now we will add clouds to our banner. And again, I have some vector artwork, and what came along with the vector artwork was a JPEG of some clouds. So I'm just going to make a selection from that JPEG. So let's find our clouds. I'll zoom in a little bit. I'm going to use this cloud right here. So let's go ahead and get the magic wand. 32 on the tolerance, anti-alias. Let's go ahead and copy. We can go back, and I'm going to select my topmost layer so the cloud goes on top of everything, and we will paste. There's that blue halo. We'll fix that. Let me scale this real quick. We'll accept. Let's command click. We will go up to select. We'll modify. We'll contract by 2 this time. Click OK. We will inverse our selection, delete that outer part of the cloud, deselect, and position our cloud. Let's go ahead and call this cloud 1. Let's make a copy. This will be cloud 2. We'll position, and I should say I'm on frame 1 of the timeline, so everything should work out okay. Let's scale our cloud down a little bit. Let's make our cloud a little bigger. We'll accept. Let's take cloud 2 and duplicate. This will be cloud 3. We'll save. We'll take our cloud. I'll make this one sort of like so, and we'll accept. And we now have clouds on our banner. Now we're going to add our rocket. Again, I'm going to use the JPEG file to make a selection. I should have my rockets open here. Let's zoom in, and I'm going to use this rocket right here. Now the easiest way to get a hold of this one is let's just use the rectangle marquee, and I don't care that we get a little extra white around this, so let's go ahead and copy. Let's go back, select our topmost layer and paste. Let's scale our rocket down, and I'm going to rotate the rocket a little bit, and our rocket is going to go about here. Let's get rid of this white, so we'll go ahead and accept. So I can see all of that white. I'm just going to move this up here a little bit. Let's get our magic wand. We will select, and let's go ahead and delete, Command D, and this time it looks pretty good, except for these little slivers right here, so I'll just use the rectangle marquee and delete those, and we'll move our rocket down, go and get the rectangle, delete, go back to our move tool, we'll deselect, zoom out a little bit, and our rocket will go right about here. I might move this cloud up a little bit because I want it to be in the flame here a little bit more, so I'm just going to move that one up. That way I don't see this space here. I might make this cloud slightly bigger, and I believe that looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and set that transformation. I might move the rocket back just a touch, and we'll go ahead and save. And we now have our rocket. Let's go ahead and select our rocket and zoom in. And we're now going to animate the flames coming out of the rocket. So I want to select the flames. The easiest way is to command click layer 1. Actually, I should rename layer 1 to rocket. Let's command click the icon, and we'll just use the polygon lasso tool. And if I hold the option key, I'll get the negative sign. So if I start outside of the selection and come into the selection like so, and I'm going to come in right to this blue area and come over, back, outside of the flame, and then let's just go around our rocket real quick. We'll connect back over on the other side, and that will take away the selection of the rocket and leave us with the selection of the flame coming out the back. Now let's go ahead and zoom in really close here. And when we make a selection, that selection is just on the edge, so we should be okay. We can delete the artifact that's left over. So I'm going to zoom out, and with the rocket layer selected and our flame selected, let's go ahead and we will just cut. So we can do edit and cut, and then we will do edit and paste. And I don't care where this is for the moment. Let's just move it over here. We'll go back to our rocket, and I'm going to select the eraser tool, and my eraser tool is set to a size of about 13, a hardness all the way at 100%. That's fine. Let's just click and drag over those few stray pixels. That should be fine. Let's go back to layer 1, and we'll call this the flame. And I want to fix this area being this little notch out of here. And this is really easy to fix. I'm just going to go and first get the eyedropper. We will sample our color from this inner part of the flame. Let's go get a brush. The brush is pretty big right now, so let's make the brush a little smaller. The hardness, I'm going to go somewhere between like 85 and 90. It should be a fairly hard edge. Let's make our brush a little smaller. All right, so I'm just going to paint this in, and that's good enough. So we'll go back and get our move tool. We'll zoom out, bring this over. We'll put our flame right here-ish. We'll take our flame and move our flame underneath our rocket. So everything looks pretty much like it did before. We're on frame 1, so as we click our layers, our frames, then we should see nothing's happening with the flame yet. Now, we can animate the movement. Unlike the rotation we have to have multiple frames. But if we want to move something, all we have to do is go from frame to frame to frame and move the element. Okay, we can't scale it, we can't rotate it, but we can affect the position. So I'm going to go to frame 1, and we don't need to move our flame very much. So I'll go to frame 2. I can just use the arrow keys, or I can grab the flame and just move it a little bit. Now, if I go and toggle back and forth, I didn't move it at all, so it might be, it sort of snaps, the flame snaps to where it was. So maybe I just use the arrow keys, and now there's frame 1, there's frame 2. Frame 3 will be frame 1, okay? So I'll go to 4 and I'll move the flame. 5, because all of them were the same position as 1. 5 is back at 1, okay? So there's 1 where we started. 2 we changed. 3 is back. 4 we changed. 5 is back. 6, let's change a little bit. 7 is back. 8 will change a little bit. 9 is back. 10 will change a little bit. 11 is back. 12 will change a little bit. 1 is back. So let's deselect and just take a look at our animation. Now we don't have to move a lot, and we really don't want to move some things too much because then it's visually too busy. But I can buy into the flames moving kind of jittery like the way they are right now. So let's go ahead and stop. We will save, we'll zoom back out, and we now have animated flames for our rocket. All right, so the animation part of the flame is pretty cool, but the flame itself isn't overly exciting. So let's make the flame part a little more visually interesting. So I'm going to take the flame layer and let's duplicate this, and we'll rename flame 2. And it might be a good idea to call this one flame 1. And we're going to take flame 2 and let's change, let's try, I believe multiply is going to look pretty good. Let's go ahead and test this. Now I had layer 3 selected, so I need to go back to frame 1, and then go to my flame 2 and select multiply. And that should apply to all of the layers. So let's just run through real quick. And there we go. And that's actually kind of gives it sort of a interesting effect. All right, so using one of our screen modes to create a bit more of a saturation effect within the rocket flame. Let's add our headline. So I'm going to select frame 1 and the rocket layer, get the type tool, then we will quickly just pan over a little bit. Let's go ahead and add our headline, which is Steampunk. I'm going to use, let's just take a look at our type here, and I like Righteous 21 for the font size, and then we're going to have -25 on the tracking, and I kind of like this color that I had selected earlier for the flame. It looks kind of nice on this background here. Let's get our type to pop out a little bit more. Let's add an effects. So let's go ahead and set our type. We'll go and get the FX. This is dropping down below the screen, but I'm just going to add a stroke to this. And our stroke is going to be, let's go 4 pixels, and let's center our stroke. And the blend mode, let's go normal. Let's see, 100% is good. White looks good. Our spacing in between the letters, so that tracking looks good. It doesn't really look like we need to adjust any individual kerning or space between the letters. It's fairly acceptable. So let's click OK, and we now have our headline. Let's go ahead and add our subhead. With our text tool, we'll drag out another text block, and this one, let's type in time travel. Now we'll select our type. Again, I'll use Righteous. This time we're going to make our type smaller. Let's try 11. I'll keep the tracking at -25, and I want the color. Let's go ahead and set our color to be 210 on the red and 159 on the green. And I think I accidentally pressed return. And then our blue will be 80. So 210, 159.80, and we'll click OK. We're going to have to adjust this one a little bit, this one being the subhead. So let's zoom in a little bit, go back and get the type tool and select our type. We'll get our move tool and we'll move our type up a little bit. Now with time travel selected, let's add FX and a stroke. And this time the stroke is going to be, let's try 2. And I want the stroke, because the type's a bit smaller, I'll do the stroke on the outside. And normal, 100% overprint, the white looks good. So we'll click OK. Now the kerning can be improved a little on this one. It's a little tight between the I and the M. So let's get our text tool and click in between, and let's change our kerning metric here to, let's try +5, maybe 10. So that's better. Might have to be 12. And you notice when I'm changing the I and the M, other letters are moving around a little bit also. So this is getting better, a little more space. Let's try, just because we can, we'll try 15. That's looking pretty good. So now let's get a nice alignment with the outer part of the T, the top bar of the T, and the bottom part of the S. And we'll deselect, and that looks pretty good. Let's bring time travel down just a little bit, and then we will zoom back out. And overall, that doesn't look too bad. I'll go with that for now. We might be able to increase this space between the I and the M a little bit, but I'm going to leave it as is for right now. So we now have our headline and our subhead in place. Now let's add a little flare call to action, and we'll do so inside of our larger rotating gear. So let's select our topmost type layer. We'll get the text tool and just click and drag a box. Let's just type in blast off, exclamation. Our type will be, again, righteous. We'll go 13. Let's reduce the leading to 10. Let's select our text. We'll center, and our color is okay. Our tracking, we'll leave our tracking the way it is at -25. Let's go ahead and move our type like so. Now we have our call to action. I like the colors in the banner. They're fun, they're vibrant, you know, they have nice saturation, but it's not quite steampunk. Let's select frame 1. What I'm going to try to achieve is where there's more of an even hue across the banner. And let's go ahead and close gear group 1 up. So I want an even hue, but I want something that sort of feels a bit more antiquated, sort of a sepia tone. I'm going to take the background and I'm going to leave this orange. So let's call our background burnt orange. And let's make a copy of burnt orange layer here. I made a new layer, sorry, not a copy. And we'll change burnt orange copy to burnt orange screen. Let's move this up above our rocket, and we're going to keep this layer above all of our artwork but below all of our type. And I'm going to change the screen mode here to hue, and you might want to explore different screen modes, because sometimes you just come across a happy accident. Like, this is actually pretty cool. It's not what I want for steampunk. That's a little closer, but the rocket and the clouds are a bit washed out. Obviously that doesn't work, but I'm going to go through the screen modes and just let you take a look. And obviously some are going to work better than others. Let's just keep taking a look. I'll work my way through a little bit faster. That's actually kind of cool too, using difference, just inversing all the colors. That's kind of nice also. Subtract. Hue, saturation, color's nice. Luminosity is interesting, but not really what I'm looking for. But I like color. and I like hue. They're pretty close. I'm going to go with hue. So if I turn this layer off, you can see the change is somewhat subtle, but it's mostly affecting the rocket. Let's take this one level further and let's add an adjustment layer. Now again, this is down below the screen, so it's not a little difficult to see, it's impossible to see. I'm going to select hue saturation from the adjustment layer list. I'm going to bring this panel down a little bit. Let's try 36 on our hue, and basically you can just go nuts with this and come up with some really cool interaction. But let's go back to our 36 and then up the saturation to about 58, then -7 on the lightness. Now the real trick here is I'm going to click colorize, and I probably should have changed the numbers first. That was my bad. Let me change these real quick. 36, 58, and -7. And now we're starting to get that sepia tone, and the sepia tone is affecting all of the layers underneath. That ends up looking pretty cool. We are almost to the end. Let's zoom in a little to our call to action blast off, and let's see if we can jazz this up a little bit more. So we will select our type blast off. Let's go down to the effects, again off screen here, but I'll add the last effect, which is a drop shadow. And I want to make sure frame 1 is selected, and I'm going to set my baseline setting, and then we're going to go frame to frame and we're going to change the opacity, and that's going to give us a animation in the back of this drop shadow fading up and down, which will draw more attention to the call to action. Let's go with multiply. Let's double check our color. 238, 136, 16. On the opacity, I'm going to change this to 20. So it's very, very subtle. And then 228, 16. That is good. We should have our baseline settings, and all we're going to need to do is change our opacity. So let's click OK. We'll go to frame 2. We'll have to go back and open up our opacity, and this one will be 30%. That's interesting that it usually doesn't change on its own like that. All right, so 20%. Okay, let's check this again. 30%. Let's go to number 3, frame 3, and this one will be 40%. Let's go to 4. This will be 50%. We'll go to 5. I think we're now at 60%. 6. 70%. 7 should be 80%. 8 will get us to 90%, and I believe that's as far up as I'm going to go, is 90%. We'll click OK. Now we're going to start going back down, only this time there's less frames, so we're going to have to make more of a jump, but that will make the effect a little bit nicer. So this one will be 70, number 10 will be 50, 11, let's try 35. On our 12th frame, let's go just 25, like so. So now each frame should have our drop shadow getting a little more intense with a bit more opacity. So we'll go back to 1 and let's just test our animation. And now we just have that drop shadow fading up and fading back, which gives us a little more visual interest to that call to action. It draws in the user's eye. We are at our last step, so let's zoom out, and what we'll do is export an animated GIF. Let's go File, Export, and we will do Save for Web Legacy. This way we can see what's going on here. Our loop will be forever. We're going to use a GIF. We don't really need any transparency, so I'll take the transparency away. The colors are 256. You'll see that this GIF is going to load its own color table, which is known as a CLUT, or a color lookup table. And right now our size is 1080 by 384, so I'll leave this at 100%. We can test real quick, and we can see our animation. We'll stop and we should be able to click save. We will save this to our frame animation, and I'll just save it right into the main folder, banner, frame, Annie, GIF. Let's click save. All right, so we exported to our frame animation folder. Here is our animated GIF file. Here's a web browser. We'll just take our file and drag it inside. And we now see our animated GIF of our steampunk web banner.